I don't have too much to say on the reappearance of Rachel Price, but I think there are a handful of details from the novel that could be interesting to those who have or have not read it. Let's start with a spoiler-free review, and let's also begin with the positives. I'm not much of a mystery thriller reader, but my wife and I read this together, and still I thought that this novel was, for the most part, indulgently fun and frenetic and engaging. Holly Jackson has a knack for writing bristlingly fast-paced plot, at least until about 75% of the way through this book, where the twists and development plays so fast and loose that the novel is actually weighed down heavily, to the point of halting the experience to a literal standstill. However, for the most part, this novel has a great immersive feeling where each detail feels necessary towards the conclusion of the novel. That story is the story of Annabelle Price, daughter to Rachel Price, who disappeared when Annabelle was 2, taken by a stranger. After 16 years, Rachel returns, but amidst the press coverage of her disappearance and her reappearance, Belle begins to suspect Rachel of lying. Several pieces of her story don't add up, and so Belle begins to retrace these details in defense of her father, Charlie, who she cherishes and who was wrongly accused and tried for having killed Rachel, supposedly. Along the way, she works with the documentary filmmakers involved in showcasing Rachel's original disappearance, notably documentary assistant Ash, who is handsome and flirty and witty, just the way you like it. Holly Jackson is quite good at intuition, whether this is from having a great deal of institutional knowledge about her genre, or from a creative talent for visualizing a scene. The reader gets all sorts of intrigue and jokes and characterization right when you need it. Playing up on reader expectations, she is able to simultaneously reveal things to the reader at the proper time, while also holding back a thing or two. There are no new characters past the halfway mark, though, and there are some details that are well foreshadowed. This produced in me some laugh-out-loud moments, some genuine feelings of what I would call schlock shock, where the twist is so hilarious and fun that I feel its inclusion earns itself. Most importantly, this novel is far longer than the average for this genre, and for the most part it managed to keep my attention regardless. That being said, my wife and I listened to this audiobook at 2 times speed, and I was still able to be on my phone or playing a video game while following along. Therefore, some readers might decry this book as being too handholdy, while some other readers might appreciate the scenic detail, the zoomed-in feeling of the novel, so your mileage may vary. Alright, I've pretty much gotten as close as I can to the book before I spoil it. Last chance to turn away. I think it's a really fun book that you should probably read if you're into this genre, and even if you're not in this genre, you should check it out. So from here on, I'm going to be spoiling, so. Okay, here we go. Though Jackson did a good job with many details, not all of them are foreshadowed well. For instance, when we discover that it is in fact Charlie and not Rachel who Annabelle should be concerned with, Jackson provides many examples of gaslighting in hindsight that work for the moment but could have been handled much better in a revised draft. For instance, because the novel takes place in the third person, it would have been pretty easy for us to see examples of Charlie's behavior towards Belle in a way that would have us, the reader, view their relationship, or at least the way Belle describes the relationship, with some skepticism, and present us with a bit of dramatic irony for the later twist. Because much of the middle of the book, while highly enjoyable, suffers from a paucity of foreshadowed details, one of the strangest details that I loved enthusing about was the presence of, quote-unquote, Taco Bell woman. For those unaware, when Belle begins to think back on the choices made by her father in her presence, she is told about how Charlie picked up a woman while waiting in line for Taco Bell. They then left and did it while leaving Belle in the car. Later, Charlie performed a gaslighting maneuver on Belle, saying that she was only in the car for a couple of minutes rather than the hours spent, which was in fact reality. This is not only a bizarre repetition of Belle's position in the midst of Rachel's disappearance. To me, I continue to laugh at the idea of what kind of people hook up while in line at Taco Bell. This last-minute detail to change the nature of a character is something that occurs several times towards the end of the novel, And had Jackson revised this novel one more time, I think these problems would not have occurred quite this way. Because when we get to the end of the book, we realize that this novel suffers from the typical problems of thrillers. And that is something I'll call the telephone problem. Hopefully we all know what the game of telephone is, where one person in a line starts with a message and has to whisper it to the next in line. By the end of the long line, the message has become warped to the point where the original intent is lost, or the result is very far afield from what we started with. Most authors do not conceive of their novels as a whole in their heads. They work dialectically from detail to detail, and the wholeness of the work comes on its own. Unless you plan on writing several drafts and spending up to a decade writing the novel, like Donna Tartt, where not only each detail links together well, but the whole of the novel is presented with a richer theme. Because Holly Jackson is a fast and entertaining writer, she doesn't really have that opportunity, so something's got to give, right? In the reappearance of Rachel Price, what is most concerning is the relationship not between Belle and her parents, but her parents with each other. Very little history is given over to their lives before Annabelle, so when we see Charlie change from kind-hearted dad to ruthlessly evil man-demon overnight, we should pause after the end of the novel and consider how on earth they got together, or fell in love, had 2 children, and so on. This could have been explained as well. People really do change, and I have no doubt that the Charlie she got with at the beginning could have turned out to be a very different Charlie years later. It does happen, but it is not remarked upon in the novel. This is not a problem limited to Holly Jackson. Endings in general, and endings and mysteries in particular, seem to be difficult to pull off. We should praise Jackson for setting up all the pieces of the novel before the halfway point, but the trade-off comes from having to then create a scenario that is both plausible and surprising given our established characters. That means that many of these details are too interlinked in such a way that if you give up one detail, like when it is revealed that Grandpa kidnapped Rachel, the other details have to get swept along with it at the same time. This results in characters standing around in the dark, revealing what remains of the novel in a massive climax that bogs down the resolution of the story. There's just too much to have to explain in order for the story to work. The business of a detective like Hercule Poirot in Agatha Christie novels is to provide a form for all of these reveals in the ending to take place. It's when Hercule reveals the mystery. There is no detective necessarily in Holly Jackson's mystery, but then again, we should keep in mind that even Agatha Christie was not perfect, and many endings of her novels include the shocking surprise inclusion of a hidden sibling or a doppelganger. Some endings, like the ending of Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, for example, work, I think, because they deal less with a surprise of plot than with a surprise of character. And perhaps that is one way to get past this problem of endings. But as we can see here, this surprise of character still led to questions rather than answers. So I wouldn't say it's an intractable problem, but it is still a very difficult one. That being said, I did enjoy my experience with the reappearance of Rachel Price. Jackson rightly understands that being a teenager is a question of paranoia. All of a sudden, your parents are acting insane. And whether that is because that turns out to actually be the case, because they're going through a midlife crisis, or they're just waiting for you to graduate so they can get divorced, or because it's you as an adolescent who is growing up and seeing the world through this skewed young adult lens. Regardless, it is happening. That's what this book feels like, that distorted, paranoiac lens. That was pretty fun to revisit. Anyway, I think if you're interested in fun, which can be nice when reading every now and then, you should definitely give Holly Jackson a shot. Thanks for listening.